There's one back there now. There we go. Okay, now there's still one open back there. Let's not leave open seats. Maybe I'll take it. Okay. We do tape these lectures, so I'm going to have to go through another introduction to have it go on tape. So I apologize for kind of going through all of it. By the way, anybody who needs, the bathrooms are down the hall. There's a code number to get in the bathroom door that you have to read on the way out. You go through a door as you go down that hall down there, and there's a code number, and the bathrooms are just down the hall. Anybody else have any questions before we do the official introduction? All right, great. The board members will be around afterwards if you have any questions about SBC. Joel, can you hear me okay? Or do I need a mic? Okay. Welcome to the Sustainable Business Council's January lecture in our Sustainable Lecture Series. Tonight we will have Brian Kearns from the University of Montana joining us to discuss the potential for wind power in Missoula. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsors for tonight. MCAT graciously provides a location and filming for this lecture series. Big Sky Brewing and Kettle House Brewing provide our beer for all of our events. And tonight the Missoula Community Market provided food for us. And Fungal Jungle provided a door prize for us. So you can go out and check out all of those members at our website, www.sustainablebusinesscouncil.org. And I will bring Brian up now. Brian has been working with the University of Montana for several years now. He helped head up a program that they hope to institute here in the next year, or is heading up in alternative energy. And he's also got a number of research grants that he's been working on with regards to energy. One of them deals with wind power, and he's going to tell us some about that tonight. Brian?
Thank you, Susan. Welcome. I'm thrilled as well to see such a turnout. And lights. Do I have those? No. There we go. This is a modest little research project, and I'm glad it generated so much interest. But it's more than that. As I heard people going through the room, it's time. It's time to think about these things, to develop these things, and I'll talk a little bit later, but there's people here that already have developed wind power and expect to develop more wind power. And this part of the state is notoriously overlooked, and I think because most wind maps that are prepared don't show much wind potential in this area. However, we all know that, at any given point in time, Hellgate Canyon or up on a ridge or something, you're practically blown over. And so there are pockets of good wind resource. And part of my efforts were to try to identify some areas here. And I have 2 anemometer towers, and when you put one of these puppies up, they stay up for 12 to 24 months to 3 years. So you got to be smart about where you put these things. And and I had 2 of them. I struck out on one, and I think I didn't hit a home run, but I got a base hit on one. So, and I'm looking forward to deploying them again this coming when the weather breaks, and getting them back out on some other interesting places around town. So let's just start here, and I apologize for the quality of the slide. Actually, I guess it's something to do with the projector. And I don't have too many word slides, but please, if you can't understand or some of the writing up there, ask me, and I'll elaborate a little bit. So, oh man, you always start with a joke, right? Can you read that? It says a wind farm, and you beans, sprouts. Boy, it doesn't really have the impact if you can't read it. So this was supposed to be a test for the audience to see if you got it, so I knew what sort of level I needed to speak about. Let's just get right into it. Well, this is really... Anyway, these are mostly qualitative qualitative graphs. You all know that energy prices are going up. Here's a fairly dramatic, can't really tell, can you? This is the commodity NYMEX crude oil. You can see it coming up there. It's you know, a day chart with, you know, high, low, close type of thing. And you can see in these years here a dramatic increase. And of course it's peaked up here and it's starting to fall off again. And you'll see that. You'll see that with any commodity is up and down and all around type of action. But I think significantly you'll see, especially with energy commodities, an upward trend. And here let's look at natural gas, same type of creature here. And again, you see a fairly, over the same time period, a fairly distinct increase. Peaking, there was a big blowout here, and then it kind of dropped back, and it's, you know, fluctuating a little bit, and recently come down because of warm winters in other parts of the nation. Long term, you got to look at, and I'm sure you all appreciate this, you know, coming from your, what you said your backgrounds were and your interests are. Energy is a finite resource. Energy, well, petroleum, fossil fuels are a finite resource. And depending on who you talk to, there's a phenomenon known as Hubbard's peak. And this is a graphic that attempts to sort of quantify that, showing all the, and again, I apologize for this, but it shows all the significant oil and natural gas finds, and I think coal might be in there as well, over the course of you know, 100 plus years, and showing how it's building to a peak here. And what you have here is the line. This is, back this way is all historic, and back this way is forecast. So, you know, right here you can definitely see, you know, some leveling activity, whereas, you know, in any other time in history, it's basically up, 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 up. And we've had several years of level. Now, what happens after this period of time and we look forward, you know, it's anybody's guess. They're guessing that, well, we're going down. And when that happens and, you know, supply or consumption outstrips supply, you have very compelling economics that can change the effect of our society, of the entire world. Let's take a look at the United States energy use. Is there anything we can do about these graphics? Maybe bring the laptop up here and everybody turn around and look at the laptop because it's fairly clear back there. Whoops. It's a very interesting graphic that comes from the Energy Information Agency, federal branch, or a branch of the federal government. And I'm sorry. And what you have here is energy inputs. Here's American supply or consumption of energy, about 100 quadrillion BTUs. That's one with 15 zeros after it, quadrillion. Actually, it's 100, so it'll be another 2 zeros, so 17 zeros after it. Here is our imports right now, petroleum mostly, a little bit of natural gas coming in from Canada. They amount to, I can't read the number now, but it amounts to about 30-some percent, 32% of our supply is coming in imports. And you have, they're almost equal, not quite, about 25% apiece, outputs in residential, commercial, industrial, and transportation. Actually, these last year a little bit larger. That's what this country is doing with its energy supply. Oh, I really got to apologize for this. This slide, there's a couple things I want to show. One is this green line here is renewables. I got to read it here. This is energy production by source. And these two bottom lines are nuclear. You can see nuclear is basically flatlined. Renewables are coming up ever so imperceptibly. And then up here you have fossil fuels. Over here, what I want to show is this is coal. Up, 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 up. And down here on this, you can see these a little bit. This is showing mostly renewables right here, this little one right there. And that's geothermal, solar, and wind. Renewables also includes hydro and biomass, and this is hydro, and that's biomass. But as we know that, some forms are greener than other forms, and I don't know if you like, your rivers dammed up, and so, hydro may or may not be considered very green by some people. And please, I will apologize 100 times tonight. If you have any questions about what you're seeing or trying to see, stop me and I'll try to explain it a little bit more. So here we have electricity generation by fuel. And what we got here is coal. Coal is just going up, 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 up. Natural gas, you can see it, natural gas kind of peaked here about 2-3 years ago and is on a slight decline.
Why is coal outdistancing or outclassing everything else?
Cost, the cost of the fuel. And I'll show that, I'll try to show that in another slide here. And this other little thing, this is energy consumption, electricity demand increasing over time. And you can't read the scales here, but this is projecting from about here forward. The end point is 2030. Same with this. Here's your historic line, and here's your projection line. So by 2030, this is where we're expecting to be. Again, these stats are all generated by the Energy Information Agency, a branch of the federal government. I guess you just do what you got to do. Here's the energy pie, and renewable energy is a little slice here, 6%. This is current. And it's actually probably about 2 years old data, about 6% here. And then we blow this out, and you got solar up here, biomass, a big chunk of that, geothermal, hydro, and then you got wind down here. Again, that's about a couple years old. Yeah.
Could you just read the title of each graph?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
If I can read it here. I didn't bring my reading glasses. This one is called Total Energy Production and Consumption, 1980 to 2030. And again, it's in quadrillion BTUs, or quads as it's known in the industry. All right. I'll just cut to the chase. There's about a 60 quad difference here projected for 2030. Difference, here's production, here's consumption. Big deficit. And you can see the deficit here, I don't have the number for that right there, but the deficit over time is not narrowing, it's increasing.
You're starting out at a current present time?
No, this is historic, this is 1980.
That's 1980.
Right here is probably, again, this data is, by the time they digest it and spit out these analytics, this is probably 1.5 to 2 years old.
So our use has always exceeded our input.
Yeah. At least back as far as 1980.
And that's where, like, our imports come into effect, why we're importing energy?
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of that goes straight into the transportation sector, oil. Okay, I kind of laid a grim scene there. Let's move on to some hopefully more promising. Alternative energy is, I think, where everybody is excited about. Let me just talk about those a little bit. Can you even read this? Here's some different forms of alternative energy. All these on this slide are derived from the sun. Some of them might make sense, some of them, like landfill methane, might not, but all the stuff that makes landfill methane gas comes from stuff up here, mostly biomass. Oh, reading glasses. Here's a couple other forms of alternative energy. As I define it, other people, alternative, renewable, sustainable, everybody has their own little take on what the definition means and is. You may be surprised to see fossil fuels appearing here. Reforming is taking natural gas, methane mostly, and stripping hydrogen off of that. Right now, that's the cheapest way of producing hydrogen. You may have heard of the hydrogen economy. Well, right now, the cheapest way to produce hydrogen is through this process called reforming, and you don't have to do it with any hydrocarbon can go through a reforming process, propane, butane, whatever. Coal liquids, of course, Governor Schweitzer is big on that technology. To the degree that we can do these things, you are using fossil fuels, and when you process fossil fuels and strip hydrogen or do anything, combust them, you're going to produce CO2. And of course, CO2 is the main constituent of global warming gas. So, but the interesting thing about these technologies is they're exploring ways now to capture that CO2 and somehow try to keep it out of the atmosphere. We're waiting with bated breath to see how successful those strategies are. Most of them involve pumping it into abandoned oil wells or into the earth, not necessarily oil wells, but into the earth, into substrata to hold the CO2. Here we're looking at the whole smear of alternative energy, not the whole, but the main players here, and the installation cost of generation. These are dollars per kilowatt. So if you're putting in a 2 kilowatt solar photovoltaic system, expect to pay about 20 grand. Small wind, I have them mostly listed in descending order of expense. You see small wind is fairly expensive, whereas utility wind is actually the cheapest of the renewables. Reason for that is, small wind, you're talking, 100 kilowatts or less. And if you're talking about a ranch or a farm, you're talking 5, 10, maybe even smaller kilowatt systems. But to put those systems in, you still have to do a lot of the groundwork that you have for utility wind. You got a big chunk of concrete you got to put in there. You got a tower you got to put in. You got interconnections, electrical, all that stuff. And you have the same sort of cost for utility wind. So if you can, instead of put a 10 kilowatt generator, put a megawatt generator on top of that system, it just really brings that cost per kilowatt down. And for comparison, you have some of the more traditional electrical generators here. Natural gas, of course, coming in at the very bottom. Very, very efficient process of putting those things in.
What is the size comparison between a small wind generator and a utility? Just as far as like
How big?
Yeah.
Different people have different ideas on that. I call small wind anything below 100 kilowatts.
Like, I don't really understand the kilowatt very well.
Kilowatt is 1,000 watts. Watts is a unit of power.
Just that, like, height-wise.
Height. Oh, okay. Well, height is an independent variable. I mean, you can take a 10 kilowatt system and put it 100 meters up in the air. These big utility, and I'll give you some reasons why, but these things usually are 100 to 200 meters. That's 200, 300 feet up in the air. And there's a compelling reason for why they do that. Small wind, because it's a farmer and a farm, and you got to maintain these things, so you got to climb up there or somehow get it down on the ground occasionally. So they're usually somewhere 100 feet or less tower height.
And then the diameter of the blades is a lot smaller, obviously, on the small machines. Would it be?
Absolutely.
You can't correlate exactly, but what would it be in terms of, say, average diameter for a small wind system as opposed to a big wind system?
Oh, well, they're getting huge with the utility wind. I read a test report, National Renewable Energy Lab in Colorado, NREL. is conducting a test on a blade. And we figured out the diameter, if you put two of these things or figure out the rotor area, it would be 2 football fields. 2 football fields. Huge, huge. Now, a lot of them aren't that big, but they're big. And for a small wind, you may have seen the Hellgate turbine. That rotor diameter is probably 35 feet diameter.
How big is that generator?
Say again?
How big is it?
The-
Hellgate generator?
The Hellgate?
Yeah.
10 kilowatts.
10.
Yeah.
But does
What
that,
does-
Say again?
What does an average house use?
Average house uses, when we talk about kilowatts, it's instantaneous power. You know, you turn everything on in your house and you're going to be drawing, I don't know, 5, 6, depending on what you have and what kilowatts. Mostly you measure your energy, well, you do measure energy in kilowatt hours. When you pay Northwestern Energy or Missoula Electric Co-op or some of the people that Bill Drummond has, they measure it in kilowatt hours. And the average, at least my house, consumes about 1 kilowatt, or about 24 kilowatt hours a day. So about 1 kilowatt hour an hour.
the Hellgate system, does that incorporate a battery bank also?
Actually,
Or
it
is that
does.
direct feed?
Yeah, it feeds directly into the facility right next door to it, Montech, and for the most part, it just feeds their electrical needs. But there is a battery system in there, and it can charge up and top that off. Here's a qualitative chart of different cost of energy for the different renewable energy resources. Don't get fooled here. These scales are not identical, so these end numbers are not all the same. But the point I want to make here is dramatic changes, dramatic reduction in cost for most of these technologies, which we expect to continue forward. These are energy prices again. Electricity here, it's energy price. The title of the slide is Energy Prices 1980 to 2030 in dollars per MMBT or per million BTU. Here's electricity, about let's call it $25 per million BTU. Oil, natural gas, and here's one of the reasons somebody's asking me why coal was going up there and as far as an energy generator. Cost of coal is way down here compared to all the other alternatives at the moment. So let's get into wind, and hopefully these pictures might show up a little bit better. Wind is fascinating to me because I think of all the renewable technologies, there's been just a whole bunch of different creativity dumped into wind. Here's what's called a Darius wind machine, vertical. It spins vertically. Kind of weird. There was one of these when I lived in Norman, Oklahoma. It was very interesting to watch this thing move. But the nice thing about these things is because it's spinning in this direction, you can have your generator down to the ground, so you don't have to send somebody, a couple hundred feet up in the air to work on it, or bring something a couple hundred feet up in the air down to the ground and work on it. So the problem with it is you can't put them very high up. Well, I guess you can. And you have what's called a wind shear effect, especially when it's this close to the ground, so that the wind speed down here is different than the wind speed up here. And it can have interesting effects on your machine. I'll just flash through a couple of these other wacky designs. Who knows what these things are, and who knows if they ever flew. Some more. This one, whoops. This is there's people standing here, so you can get an idea of the size of this. This was meant to be like a conveyor belt, for God's sakes. The wind blows into it, and these things lift. go up and turn around and come down and go up and turn around and come down. I don't think that puppy ever flew either. Like I said, there are a lot of creativity dumped into a bunch of different wind designs, and there still is. There's a gentleman in town that moved up here from Utah who has a very interesting design of again, a vertical wind machine. You put these things up pretty high, and then you have your generator down on the ground. So there's definitely some advantages for building a machine of that nature. So let's talk about the wind industry, and here's a slide showing kind of a snapshot, year-end 1999, what was going on across the nation. California here leading the pack. They had, was about 1,600 megawatts. The total throughout the nation was about 2,500 megawatts at that point in time, 1999. Let's fast forward one. And this is about mid-year 2006. And you have Texas, Texas kind of taken over, California right behind, and a whole lot of other people weighing in at this point in time, including Montana, on the basis of the Judith Gap project. So obviously wind is picking up.
What was the total generation then?
Oh, this one? Yeah, good point. Thank you for these glasses. Just about 10,000 megawatts. So it went from 2,500 to 10,000 in the space of about 6 years. I know some people are here, biologists here, raptors. Somebody's curious about what ridge lines will look like, wind development. Let me just start tackling those things straight away. Let's start with the first one, birds, raptors, avians, bats too. In Altamont Pass, California, near Livermore, California, was one of the first wind farms ever built in early 1980s, 1981. It was built for 125 megawatts, and they put 6,000 to 7,000 turbines on that thing. Turbines back then weren't nearly the big capacity monsters that we have today. So back then, a large commercial turbine was 50 to 60 kilowatts. Now we're talking 3, 4, 5 megawatts. So in Altamont Pass, you had people just kind of stumbling their way through this process. First one done, you know, they don't know a lot. They're putting up all these towers, and, you know, they try to do it the right way. There were a number of things they didn't get right. One was, you know, a basic site inspection. They found that this particular pass area was home to the California ground squirrel, big populations of these rodents, which, if you're a raptor, makes a tasty evening treat. So the golden eagle was in abundance over there, and it being a mountain pass, it was, of course, on some sort of migratory path. Here, I'm sorry. Here's a couple of shots of what was going on there, and you just really can't tell. So here you have these turbines all lined up in a row. First row here, second row spaced conveniently, you know, in between the spaces of the first row. So you're a bird, you're trying to, you know, fly through this pass, and you miss these first two turbines, but boom, you get the second. Even if you miss that one, there's another row behind that, another row behind that. So you can't get around it without getting sliced up. Another thing they did wrong is, maybe you can see it a little bit here, the lattice work on these turbines. Nowadays, these big turbines are tubular. There's no lattice work. And they had big concrete pads. Being a rodent, you know, what you do is you dig under these concrete pads so you got a nice little home. Being a bird, you got these lattice, so you got a nice little perch. You sit on the perch, wait for the rodent to come down, dive, and then try to find some place to eat your meal. But all these things are spinning above you. So They just did a real mess of things. But on the basis of that experiment, I'll call it, we got a whole lot smarter about what we do with wind turbines, where we place them, and how we make them. Another thing they did with these early machines, these blades spun very, very fast. And they, as you watch a plane propeller, it becomes mostly invisible. And so the birds could not perceive, the rotor path, and therefore would fly into them. Modern turbines, they've addressed that by slowing down the tip speed quite a bit. So they're better perceptible for birds.
Have you ever heard of a study that was done, I think in Denmark, that actually addressed that issue?
There's been a number of studies done all over the place.
Because
I have a book full of
I read one where it basically said, if you compare the actual, let's say, square miles raptors there, and how many are dying through flying into power lines, which was or had for a long time been a big issue, where they ended up proving that it's basically about the same amount that, dropped dead by natural causes. And they came up with, some similar numbers for actually the wind power, that they say it is not an overly threat for actually the raptors.
Yeah, thanks. It's a beautiful segue for my next slide, if you can see it. Let me just ask this: what do people in the audience who think might be the greatest threat to birds, bats?
Lead.
Say again?
Lead.
Lead?
Habitat loss.
I don't know.
Pesticides.
Guns.
Very interesting. I heard some ringers in there. I'm not sure about the lead one. Oh, okay, yeah, lead shot, sure. Here we go. I'll have to read this for you. This was really a great slide. We'll start here. Whoops, go back here. Buildings, glass in buildings. The number is, this is for every 10,000 birds that are killed by human activities. Of every 10,000, 5,500 are from buildings. Look at how big that is compared to this. This one's house cats, and that's 1,000. And who knows? In fact, I have 2 cats. My cat brought one home for me the other day, and it just so happened I heard that morning on NPR. Have you heard that? You call. There's this website. You go on, and if you spot a bird being predated by anything, cat, mountain lion, whoever, who knows, you can get on this website and report it, and so they're going to accumulate statistics.
Yeah.
So I did that. So my cat's going to be in there next year. This one's other. I don't know what's all in that category. Maybe 8-year-old boys with a red, white, or BB gun. Gentleman here from Germany said high tension wires right there, 800. Vehicles, cars. How many people have hit a bird in a car? 700. This is again out of every 10,000. 700 are.
Where's this figure from, this chart?
This is from the American Wind Energy Association. This next one here is again 700, and that's from pesticides. And this one here, 250, is from communication towers. You can't even see this one. What's that? Wind turbines. Less than one. Less than
As
one.
the number increases, the
Yeah.
variables are going to change.
Sure.
And what would that picture look like from the Raptor Foundation, versus the wind industry?
Well, these days, I know what you're saying. This is coming from a wind advocacy group, so they're going to skew the statistics. And I don't know, maybe they did. But I do have studies, and the studies were funded by a variety of different organizations, and all these data come out of those studies. Now, I didn't assemble it, so I didn't cross-check that. But, you know, I don't know, maybe a bird, well, I'll tell you what, I heard this on the news a couple days ago. NPR reported that the president of the Audubon Society, John Flicker, came out and, yeah, what a name. It's like Dr. Hatchet as a surgeon, right? Anyway, this guy Flicker, I'm not making that up, by the way, came out in favor of wind development. Is that a hand raised back there? Yeah.
I went to a talk a month or so ago by a guy from MEIC, Montana Environmental Information Center, and his talk was mostly against the coal liquefaction plants, and he touched just briefly, he answered somebody's question about wind turbines, which they are in favor of, and he said that MEIC is working hand in hand with the Audubon Society for their siting, their site specifications.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to build these things without, you know, communal buy-in. I mean, you just got to get smart. You can't have another Altamont disaster, you know. And statistics I've read, too, state that in the instance of one single turbine, there's almost no fatalities associated with it. And it has to do with ways they're painted and lighting, and, you know, there's a whole slew of other variables tied into it. But again, you know, if you know all this going in, you maximize the chances for no avian collisions, conflicts.
Yeah, I spent quite a lot of time in Solano County, California, where there's one of the new modern wind farms. And they're the very large units. And those blades move so slowly that I find it hard to believe that they're more of a threat than any standing static object.
Yeah, well, as I said before, you know, one of the issues was those early blades, those early machines, they were just spinning so bloody fast. You know, if you're a bird, you don't know what's there, and you go through it. But yeah, these new machines are much better. And they're getting better all the time. I'm going to kind of go through this. The next issue is aesthetics. Is it Philip? You know, I don't know. This is a beautiful slide. I'm sorry about this.
It's great, you can't even see the wind towers.
Look behind you. You got these buffalo, you know, a very iconic image. Here's the wind tower. There's the bird up there. We call it Turbin's bird, so sorry. This is actually a Berge. This is the same wind, not the same one, but the same manufacturer and model of the tower that's in Hellgate Canyon. It's a 10 kilowatt. Very beautiful scene. So you know, you could have this, or you can have the J.E. Corrette coal plant in Montana, outside of Billings. Was somebody here from Billings? Somebody knows Billings anyway. Or another beautiful picture that you can't see. This is the Judith Wingap Farm. Or 3 Mile Island. Or, oh, come on, rainbows, windmills, crops coming in, green. Oh, it doesn't get blue sky. Come on. Or, you know, coal strip. Or, really, maybe we should turn around and look at the computer monitor. This is offshore Holland, Denmark. And there's a series of big honkers just going up and down the coast there. You know, I don't know. I think they're cool. You know, I like to see that kind of thing. And we got to get energy from somewhere. You know, is it from here or is it from here? You know.
Can I ask you a question? It seems a bit loaded the way you're delivering this, but.
Oh, sure.
I could understand, but my interest is multiple. It's not just that I'm interested in historic preservation. I represent my thinking represents, I think, other aesthetics. One or two of these towers sitting in a location that fuels a community is one thing. When you have 150 of them or 90 of them, like you have at the Judith Gap, where most of the energy is leaving Montana along power lines. So we don't just have these towers, but we also have the transmission lines
Absolutely, yeah.
that carry the energy to Las Vegas, for example.
Yeah.
What are we giving up? That's my question. Yeah, I don't think I voted for the coal strip. I was living here 30 years ago. I don't know how many of you were living here 30 years ago.
I wasn't.
And I wasn't in favor of it at that time. But the question is, what are we trading ultimately? What you're talking about, I thought tonight you were going to talk about one or two of these towers tucked away in a canyon up on top of the mountain.
Yeah, you're kind
But,
of preceding me
you
here.
know,
But
this kind of argument.
no, what I'm doing, I'm just bringing up the question, you know, the aesthetic idea. I guess the point is, we got to get energy. Our society thrives, needs energy.
We do
Without
want to get
energy, we don't.
I understand that.
And
But
what do
where
we?
does the energy go that we get? That's the question.
Doesn't that have to do with, what about our dams? What about our coal? What about?
Does most of that energy leave Montana?
I think
or
that
not?
has more of an
50
issue to do with ownership in the government, like deciding where that goes and where it's spent.
You can't, I guess the thought I want to at least persuade some of you is that I'm not necessarily in favor of dams. I'm not necessarily in favor of coal. I just want some reasonable answers to some of these questions. That's all.
You want the energy to stay in Montana.
No, I'm just wondering.
Can I ask the
Yeah.
audience to hold off on comments and things?
Sure.
Quick questions about the slide are great, but we do have sort of a time limit, and we don't want to hold Brian here all night. He will answer questions later after we get through the presentation, but I want to let Brian get through the presentation for the most part.
Okay.
If you would, please, thank you.
What is the time limit?
So we're looking at, we were shooting for about an hour, but you can go to an hour and a half.
Okay, okay. Sorry. Your point's well taken, and I hope to get, in a few more slides, get to it. And if I don't, nail me at the end. The point is aesthetics. We got to get our power from somewhere. Do we get it from these things? And I'm an engineer. I don't find these things upsetting. If it was my backyard, I'd probably have a different idea about it. But they got to come from somewhere. Do you want this, or do you want, Well, here, this is in Phoenix. Everybody flew into Phoenix? There's that one, I think they call it South Hill. Nothing but communication towers all over the place, just everywhere. And I think, these guys got grandfathered some way, somehow. They've been around. We just accept them, and they're a blight. I think they're a blight, as much of a blight as a turbine might be. And here's some old turbines or windmills or whatever, and they have sort of a rustic, nostalgic taste to some people. Beautiful little farm there, another one. So aesthetics, you make the call. Noise. Let's talk about noise. Here's another issue that's often brought up. Wind turbines, especially old ones, did have an issue with noise, vibration, and again, as technology has improved, as these machines have gotten better, all their characteristics have gotten better. Here's a wind turbine clocking in, and they measured this sound pressure level about 100 feet away. So, they call it 45, 50 decibels, somewhere between, your quiet bedroom in the dark of night and your dining room during the day. So wind or noise, and the noise is comparable to, I don't know if you've been down Hellgate when that wind turbine's kicking around, but you can hear it. You can hear it. Is it, very loud, knocking you over? No. It's swishing. You hear the wind blowing through the trees. It's not the same type of sound, but a similar volume type of sound. The last issue I'll talk to about wind is it's a variable resource. The wind's not always blowing. It's here today, gone tomorrow, or in the morning and not in the afternoon. So there's issues with what they call firming it. So if you have a wind resource, what are you going to have? What are you going to use when you don't have the wind? Well, if you're grid tied, then you have the grid you go back on. But if not, if you want to go into a sustainable system, you have to find some sort of storage outlet. And you can talk about batteries, using batteries. Water, you can use water, pump water up to a high elevation and bring it back down, flowing through a turbine when you don't have the wind. A more futuristic, I guess I'll call it, Maybe we ought to take a collection up for MCAT afterwards and get them a new projector, huh?
Green or something.
Yeah, yeah. Hydrogen economy, you know, some people are touting this as the next energy paradigm where, you know, you have your wind generators out here producing clean, green power, and to the degree that you got excess energy, you electrolyze water. You plug your water system into it, and you produce hydrogen. In that scenario, you put the hydrogen in a tank, and then when you don't have your wind, you take off your hydrogen and you power your fuel cell, or even your internal combustion engine. Hydrogen will run your car if it's tuned properly. So I've already spent too much time on this. You know, there's issues with choosing any technology. You know, here's a couple of the traditional technologies. Here's wind, and you can't read this. Global warming, pollution, none associated with wind. Air pollution, none. Mining, extraction, none. Mercury, none. Waste, none. Habitat impacts, yes. Okay, you know, so you're going to get dinged in one way or another. Wind power comes from this equation. Whoops, not that one, but this one. I want to point out two things here. This A means area, that's the rotor area, and this V here is the wind speed, velocity. And you might not notice it, but this tree is a cube. This is V to the third power, a cubed element. This is why those new turbines are so bloody big. The turbine, the swept area, they're maximizing the area here, 2 football fields. And they're so tall from this next slide. You see, this is what they call wind shear. At the ground, you have basically zero, and as you go up into the atmosphere, your wind speed increases. So, and because that velocity element is cubed, here's your power as it goes up. So for a 26% increase in wind from going from 10 feet to 80 feet, you get a 20% increase in wind speed, and you get a 100% increase in your power output. So that's why all things, and you're paying a lot of money for those big machines, and to put another 100-foot section on your tower is pretty small compared to the overall. So that's why you see those things 200-300 feet in the air. Here's the infamous wind map. A couple points here. You got basically the divide here. All the wind, the color means wind. You can't tell that. Neither can I. Yellow is what wind comes in different classifications. They're listed down here, from a class 1 wind, which is poor, up to a class 7 wind, which is called superb. And they have different speed characteristics. So you can see these bright red pockets are excellent wind resources, and most of all of it, if you're basically east of the divide, you got a pretty good wind. 3 and above is considered a candidate for a big utility turbine. On the other side where we are, you don't see anything. You see white, which is poor, no wind resource, or very little. Actually, there's a little bit of color on the ridges. So again, you know, if anybody's been up and around in here, and you know that there are pockets of wind resource, and that's what I went out to check, and that's what I found. So I had these 2 anemometers. Here's one of them. Here's me. Here's my colleague Paul Williamson. And we're putting a tower up on top of not Mount Sentinel. Somebody said they're interested in Mount Sentinel. So this is behind Mount Sentinel, University Mountain, where all the comm towers are, the cell towers, the navigation beacons up there. So that's where this puppy was for 2 years.
How tall was that tower?
This was 65 feet, 20 meters. And so that's where we had it. And this is the data we got. Again, you can't tell. Here is the wind frequency. This is what you need in order to determine how profitable the wind turbine might be. So I got a fairly good wind curve, and this is a wind rose. It shows the direction and frequency. Because of Paddy Canyon and the Bitterroot Valley and everything, the winds up on that mountain basically come in out of the west. This is west here. You need that data, and you need this data, a power curve. This is, you pick a you got your wind data, now you got to figure out, well, what can I do with this? So you go and you talk to some manufacturers, and here's a manufacturer from India called Suzlon, and they produce a 2100 kilowatt, that's 2.1 megawatt turbine, and it performs this way. As the wind speed goes up, it power generates, goes up, 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 and then right about here, it kind of flatlines, and it just keeps producing 2100 kilowatts. This one is a GE wind turbine. It goes a little bit higher, 2500. And I got now some that go up to 3, 4, 5 megawatts. You wouldn't put one of those in around here, but something like this, certainly you could put in around here. So you take those two elements, the wind distribution, this critter here, and the power curve, and do your mathematical voodoo on it, and then you can calculate how many kilowatt hours you can produce out of this machine. And again, that's the energy unit. So if I pick one of these machines and I go through those calculations, I can produce, just over 5 million kilowatt hours in a year. 5 million. So what does that mean? If you have a house like mine, that's 634 homes in Missoula off of one machine. And another thing, I don't know if any techies are in here, but the capacity factor is, you take a machine, in this case, 2.5 megawatts, you multiply it by the number of hours in a year, 8,760 hours, and that's the maximum capacity you can get from the system. Now, what's the actual capacity? Because the wind's not always blowing there, you're not always producing, downtime, whatever. So then you take what the actual capacity, as I said, is like 5 million kilowatt hours, and you divide those two, you come up with about, at least I came up with about 25% capacity factor. Most commercial installations work from 20 to 30. A few of them will get above that, but 20 to 30% capacity factor is usually pretty much the order of the day. So we have it here. We have it. Now let me talk about, gentleman over here was saying, 1 or 2 turbines sounds like a nice idea, but 100 of them doesn't. And I agree with that. And what I would like, and you couldn't do that here in Missoula because you don't have the space for it. You don't have the wind-blown, wide open farmlands that Judith Gap has, but you do have small pockets of this resource around, and you just got to be smart in finding out where they are. And you can be even smarter in finding them where, people aren't. So, but the problem there is, you got to have access, and I'll go through these steps later, but I'm just going to move it along here. The concept is called community wind. It's local people getting together, putting together a project, and we have a gentleman here, Steve Korick, who actually did this earlier last year. They get together, they put together a project, and get it going. It's usually locally owned, utility scale. It could be, I call it any kind of project below 20 megawatts. That could be, 10 towers or less. But most of them are just single towers. Minnesota has been a pioneer in this area. They've crafted a lot of legislation to make this type of concept gain hold and work and bring people together from the community together to invest in this system. And because it's locally owned, all the proceeds stay in the system, stay locally. So it just has this multiplying effect economically. And it's just a very interesting concept. And I'd like to see Missoula, start thinking about something like that. Because, number one, we do have a wind resource. We're in that wide area, but we do have pockets of wind resource. And now we just need some creative entrepreneurs to get together and put together a project. And that's what the rest of my presentation will be about. Earlier last year, I guess, there was a governmental program called CREB funding, CREB, meaning Clean Renewable Energy Bonds. And the federal government set aside $800 million for this project to fund renewable energy projects. Communities, because it's a complicated financing scheme, but it's not available for anyone. You had to be sort of a government utility or a government entity, community, a school district, municipality, co-op, tribe, yes, tribe, thank you. Any of these people could form together some nonprofit type of situation and issue these bonds and develop funding. And this group out of Billings called Green Electricity Buying Co-op, GEBCO. Steve Korick here up front is on that board. Got together and submitted one of these applications, and by golly, they got funded. $31 million is coming their way. There's some strings on it, but we won't go into those right now. Montana as a whole got $72 million, and there's 34 projects that came out of that thing last year across the state. None of them on our side of the state, at least not in the Missoula area. There's a lot of benefits with community wind. Let's touch on a few of them. Obviously, it stimulates the local economy, local people, local benefits, produces clean energy, obviously, strengthens rural communities, keeps investment dollars local, builds a new industry. In Minnesota, again, they were pioneers in this. A couple farmers got together, put up one of these things, and next thing you know, farmers everywhere in Minnesota are putting up these things. It's great. And it's a great way to start addressing or coming up with some local solutions to climate change. Let's look at a few of the. Okay, I'm a little bit ahead of myself here. You can't see it, obviously. This is a comparison of coal, wind, and solar job production in person years per $1 million invested. And this, can you see anything?
No, not really.
Oh, man. Can you turn around? The first bar, I can't even say, right around here is coal, and about 3.96 person years per $1 million invested in coal technology. Up here is wind, and that's 5.7 person years per $1 million. And over here is solar, and it's about the same, 5.6, something like that. Coal, solar, wind. Again, Minnesota had been a champion of this and probably did the most work of any state in advancing and giving a climate that's suitable for this type of activity. What this is here is a case study of 3 different projects throughout the country, in Minnesota, in Oregon, and in Texas. And it shows, you can't see it obviously, but it shows number of jobs that are created up here during the construction phase. You know, you're building the things, so there's some local jobs created during that. Down here is the operation and maintenance phase. This is the ongoing year to year for 20 plus years jobs and income that's created. And then down here, this would be the impact on the tax base in those communities. And you know, trust me, the numbers are good. You know what I'll do? I'll give Susan, I guess, a copy of my presentation of my slides. And you want to come in?
The wind energy?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be right in.
Okay. I'll give Susan a copy of my slides, and maybe she can put them out there on the on her website. And if anybody's interested, you can just download those slides and take a look at it. Okay. There's some more stuff on. Can't see that either. This is a map of Minnesota showing. That's Iowa. Here's Minnesota. Showing all the different wind projects and the various ownerships, you know, between farmer ranchers, co-ops, schools. There's a number of schools in Minnesota that found it lucrative to purchase one of these wind turbines. Same type of thing. Iowa's doing the same thing. Okay. What needs to be done? Obviously, I'm advocating here. You know, I'd like to build on the research work I've done. You know, I've discovered the resource, And I'm trying to work with other parts of the UM system to develop computer models, better computer models. They have a lot of them, but better ones. When you do climate maps, they have what they call resolution. You know, you run these massive computer programs, and they tell you it's going to be warm over here, or cold over here, or the wind's going this way or that way. But they can only do that for, and they don't do a very good job of it, but they can only do it for a pretty large section of territory, and it's usually measured in kilometers. And current, they call it resolution. Current resolution is about 5 to 10 square kilometers. So they can pretty much say if you're in this area, something's going to happen. But what I need to do, especially around here with the topography and the isolated wind pockets, pockets of wind resource, is I need to bring that resolution down quite a bit. So if I have a GIS intertide system and I can plug in, I have 2 towers. When you put these towers up, you're investing 2 to 3 years of your life. So if you pick a bad place, you just wasted a lot of time and effort. So you got to get really smart about where you put these towers to start with. And if I can get some ground data to help them better the computer models, so then I can use that computer model to pick my next site. That's sort of the iterative process I'm trying to work through. But again, I'm trying to advocate here for Missoula to contemplate this community wind project. I know that there's been some meetings where, yeah, come on in, please. Where a renewable energy co-op had been discussed, and I'm not sure what the status of that is. I don't think it's going anywhere at the moment, but I think now would be a great time. And the reason is because to develop these projects, it takes a lot of time and effort. To do the research, I got the wind data that you can use, but then you got to walk down a whole bunch of other steps. And this funding, this $800 million was for last year. And there's nothing announced yet. I just heard through the grapevine that there probably is another round of funding that will be going on for next year. But you can bet, especially with the change in politics that happened over this last election cycle, you can bet that there's going to be a lot more federal funds available for renewable energy propositions, projects. And particularly if you can form collaborative type of entities, with local people, farmers, cities, that type of thing. It just resonates very well with this grant funding applications. It takes time, it takes effort. I don't want to, I need to emphasize the time element. So if we get going now and say, and usually when these grants come down the pipe, you have but 3, maybe 4 months if you're lucky to bring everything together, produce a proposal, fill out the application, and to put in. Is that right, Steve? Yeah. It's very aggressive.
Well, actually, just one piece that was interesting is they gave out $800 million worth of grants. There were 700 projects that applied, and 600 of them were funded. So the main limitation to getting grant authorization was the ability to put it together and submit it in time. But most everybody who submitted was actually funded.
Yeah. And that's a pretty traditional or typical hallmark of grant applications, especially for the federal government. You get an announcement, and of course, with the federal government, everything is which way is the political wind blowing this year. I'll show you a slide. You won't see it though.
Excuse me. You said that you've identified some of the resource areas. Are you going to speak more in regards to what those areas are and what some of the data that you've discovered?
Yeah, I kind of did go through that.
I heard University Hill.
Yeah, University Mountain.
As far as wind speeds or any particular other areas that...
You want all the data?
Well, I'm curious.
Yeah. Well, I can get you the data.
To consider community wind, and part of that is trusting the data is there before you start investing money into the project.
Sure. Well, let me tell you this. The data I've got is not the data that a financing mechanism will want to see. I'm measuring data at 60 feet, 20 meters. Most bankable, what they call bankable data, has got to be at what they call hub height. Right. So if you're going to put a 100-foot tower out there, right, you got to be measuring at 100 feet.
Right.
Now there's mathematical formulas you can use to extrapolate. Here you are, and what do you think you're up here? And that's what I've done. But unless you have something up there, you can't be sure because of that wind shear factor. You're basically zero, and you're going up. And
We've been doing for, that's what the company that we work for was.
oh, that's right. You were doing that up in New York,
So
yeah.
I'm just curious how much data you've uncovered so far in regards to the wind resources, and specifically the Missoula community area.
Yeah.
That was available
Yeah.
to look at.
It's public data. I was using publicly funded anemometer towers, so that data will all be public. I had two of them. So one was University Mountain, that was my base hit, and then the other one was out in Ovando Valley, near the university owns some property out there called Bandy Ranch, and I put one up there on Bandy Ranch. And Ovando is supposed to be famous for wind. In fact, Browns Lake out there?
Yeah.
Is where a lot of windsurfers go to ply their trade. So I put it out there, and at least where I was, there was no wind, or very little. So that was disappointing. Again, here's a big complicated graph. Trust me that it shows, sort of all the steps and procedures that might be involved in putting a project together on community wind. You got suppliers and lenders and government and landowners, utilities, whole kit and caboodle of bulldogs out there that you need to deal with. Oh, you might be able to read this one. Business structure. There's 1,000 variables associated with these projects. That other slide is meant to display the complexity involved here. But as you start chipping away, as you start walking down it, some things make more sense, like the business structure. A lot of the incentives that flow to this type of project are in tax incentives, either accelerated depreciation, production tax credit, all sorts of tax credits. Well, if you're a nonprofit, you're not paying taxes. Or if you're a utility or a government entity, you're not paying taxes. So even though there's a lot of incentives crafted for tax relief, if you can't capitalize on those, then there's money that's not flown in your pocket. So there's different ways of forming business structures so that you can capitalize on these tax incentives and other things. One of them is, you see some of the basic forms, and these are all tied into risk and return, how much risk, how much return the venture might want to try to pursue. But most things end up most projects end up right around here, joint venture, co-ops, that type of thing. And you can form something called a pass-through where the venture accumulates the tax credits and they pass them back into the individual investors. So if you're an investor, and you've got a need for a tax shelter, this might be possibly a way to capture some of that and have those benefits flow into and through the organization, again, to keep some of the benefits local. Really complicated. When you get into this, you're going to need professionals. You can only do so much homework, and there's a bunch of material on the web. If you want to talk to me afterwards, and I can give you some ideas where to go. But trust me, it's a pretty complicated thing. But there's a lot of resources, and you're just not going to do it by yourself. You're going to need to get some pros involved. You're going to have to do the economics. I did some feasibility economics on what I found up in University Mountain. And again, there's 1,000 different ways you can craft this and assumptions that you can make. And any which way I craft it, I can get, I think, a pretty good payout project. Again, it depends on funding, what sort of low interest rate you're going to get, and tax incentives, and green tags that you might sell, all that kind of good stuff. But I found that there's a potential for a payout project up at University Mountain. Now, one of the things, that's where I had my anemometer, so that's where I know the wind is. But I'm thinking that the wind right across the street on Mount Dean Stone is pretty darn similar. And anecdotally, some people say it's even better. I'm trying to put another anemometer up there, but I haven't done it yet. We have a 50 kilowatt turbine that's in a boneyard right now that we're trying to find some funding to put up, and we're going to try and do that up there hopefully next year. I talked a little bit about incentives. Oh, here's one. Just on the news the other day, excuse me. House of Representatives, the new Nancy Pelosi 100-hour deal, kicking those bills through. One bill remains to be kicked through, that last report, and that is an energy bill. And I don't know if any of you have been following this, but this was some sort of big oil subsidies that they're going to repeal or somehow get back. Equivalent to about $15 billion is the number I've been hearing. And the legislators involved in crafting this bill want that $15 billion now to go to renewable energy projects. So let's get something together. Let's get ready, when this comes down. I mean, you don't have to have all your ducks lined up. You have to have them significantly lined up. At least the project concept, the business structure, so if you can bring all those things together and an incredible funding opportunity comes down the tubes, next December, and you have to have your application in by April?
Maybe that.
Yeah.
A couple of months.
Yeah. Believe me, it'll take you every bit. You'll be working up to the last second trying to get it done.
Is there anybody from any sort of power type of company in Montana here?
Yeah, Bill. Is he still? Bill was here. I think he stepped out. Bill Drummond. Yeah, is anybody else? I know Bill, so.
They all have to.
I'm sorry?
They basically all have to.
Have to what?
Northwestern, I was telling you that last night about that seminar I went to down in Butte.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's all renewable alternative. They have to net grid meter back, and they gotta meet you if you're gonna do that.
Well, actually, they don't.
I mean,
You have to jump through some more hurdles. You have to
Right.
make yourself a qualified facility. And then they do, but yeah. You'll find mostly not a warm reception with the utilities. Wind power is something they're forced to deal with, and they do, but they don't necessarily like it. Law requires them to. And from their perspective, it kind of messes up their system. They like everything nice and predictable, and wind comes and goes, and it's not very predictable. However, I mean, there's some forward-thinking utilities out there, Xcel Energy in Colorado and out in that area, doing some fantastic work with wind out there. So, if you force them, they'll find a way to do it. And energy itself, electricity especially, is such a commodity that they have all kinds of systems in place to predict needs and how to dispatch sources and supply. I'm pretty much finished here, I believe. Oh, here's an interesting slide. Can you see that one? What we got going here is, I was talking about before about the vagaries of government, and here you have wind power capacities from 99 up to 2006. And right here we had a production tax credit in effect. And Congress is doing this off-on stuff. This production tax credit, if you had a wind turbine or generator, you got up to 1.5 cent per kilowatt hour reduction, or kickback mostly. So that funded a lot of interest and got a spike. Then after that year, they let it expire. Nothing was going on. Then they thought, well, that was a goof, so they reinstated it. You have this, and they said, well, we're great, we'll drop it again. So we'll reinstate it, we'll drop it, we'll reinstate it. So you're getting whipsawed by these government political wins. And right now, this production tax credit is in effect and is extended until December 07? Yeah. Finish up here. In conclusion, again, I'm trying to stir the pot here. I'm an advocate for this. I've done some of the groundwork, but I can't do it all. And need help, I'd be happy to help whoever does want to step forward. There's money coming down the pipe. If you can put together a project, start putting together a project, I think you stand a very good chance, especially a community wind project, not a Judith Gap type of thing. Let's put one up, $3 million project. Let's put one up, and let's see how it goes. And I think as you'll find, as Minnesota found, they're contagious. You put one up, you put a second one up, third one, and we can start walking down that renewable energy path. Yes, sir.
I want to thank Brian, and I thank you all for holding your questions. That was very great. I try to get it through in an hour because a lot of people only leave an hour. And then if folks need to get up and go, you can get up and go. We will continue on with questions now for Brian, and we can all see each other. Make certain you speak fairly loud. This is still being taped, and Joel's trying to pick you up. He's raising and lowering the volume back there. But if you can kind of shout out a little bit.
Do you want to come up here and ask questions?
And if you want to come up here, you can, or we can turn the mic your direction. But go ahead and.
Phil.
I just wanted to clarify, I'm not really representing anyone while I was here tonight. I came because I'm interested in preservation, but I'm also interested in renewable. What I try to convey is that, the idea of wind is not necessarily, in my mind, good or bad. It's how it's portrayed. And small communities probably will benefit largely from this kind of cooperative. Some communities could probably be run almost entirely on good wind days by that energy source. The concern I have is that we have a state, these are again my personal feelings, we have a state that's very dependent on tourism. And I know some people say they like to go and look at wind towers occasionally. But I don't know how many people will make 2 trips to Judith Gap, from Minnesota or wherever they come from. And I think we have to weigh those things in.
I agree.
And I think that's what I thought we were going to be talking about tonight. And so I just wanted to clarify that. I found the balance of your talk very useful, and I hope people do grasp this concept of small installations that may well serve.
And there's another thing I didn't touch upon is the concept of distributed power. The power model we have now is central generation. You got Colstrip. You got a nuke somewhere, and you got these hydros, big systems producing power in somebody else's backyard, and transmission, long distances to Nevada, who knows, from these big monsters. Now, they're doing it that way for valid reasons. There's certain economies of scale that are achieved by doing power generation in that fashion, but you also know that there's a big push for national security, and to the degree that we move away from central generation, make it local. You don't have transmission losses if you have a generator locally. You're not losing a lot of energy by transporting it hundreds of miles and just heating the air. And I think there's issues about what type of generation. Around here we have lots of biomass, and there's a lot to be said about biomass as renewable energy. But usually that involves some sort of heat process, a combustion process. And if you do that, then you have an application for combined heat and power. So again, if you're talking small, if you're moving away from the big central distribution model into what they call distributed energy model, you have the chance of siting appropriate technology in appropriate places. And once you do that, you get kind of like an internet type of structure. You take one server down here and the internet goes on. You knock off a power plant or two, and whole sectors of the country are going down. To the degree that we move away from that, we enhance our national security. And especially some people think nuclear fusion is the next magic bullet coming down the pipe. I'll tell you what, you don't turn around without spending $1 billion with nuclear fusion. And that's going to go the exact opposite way. If you are going to go nuclear fusion, you're going to build these monstrous things, 3, 4, 5 of them across the country, and those are your military targets right there. Yes?
I
found your talk really interesting, just in the sense that I think that a lot of Americans are under this illusion that after peak oil we'll find some other dominant central energy source that will allow us to drive cars and continue the same kind of standard of living that we're used to now. And there's not much reality-based thinking in that. And I think we have this time period where we can collectively predict what's going to happen in the future, that the oil is going to become, the hydrocarbons are going to become more and more precious and more damaging to the environment through climate change. And we're given this interim here where we can use our brains and come up with alternatives, like you're talking about community-based power, and invest in that. We have, the luxury to invest in it right now, and plan for the future, and plan for a decentralized future that kind of fits with what looks like is coming down the pike. Either we're going to have to go to war to make sure that we guarantee our hydrocarbons, or we're going to have to make sure that we raise the temperature of the planet, 10 degrees Celsius over the next century, and have all the consequences that way. I thought your talk was really good because it gives us a third way,
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to convey. And the message is getting out there. Steve here is putting in 2 wind farms out eastern Montana. Let's put at least one turbine in around here. Yes.
Are there any predictions about changes in the wind resource with climate change?
Oh, good one. I don't know. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think I can answer that one without any data. Do you have some information on that, Steve?
Just the global warming models all suggest that the most intense storms will be more intense, which implies that the wind speeds will be higher. In the last 10 years, we've had the first Class 6 typhoon in Guam. There was a hurricane in Kansas and in Oklahoma in 1999 that was a Class 5 that was on the ground for 60 miles and was a mile wide. It was when the wind measuring systems blew up, it was at 314 miles an hour. So they've seen a lot of that, but that doesn't predict that your average wind speed will increase, and that's a question, probably, but I don't think anybody has the data.
Well, wind is a function of differential heating, so one part is getting hotter, and I think that's what Steve's talking about, is the patterns are going to be shifting. And in some places we'll experience higher temperatures, and some places, counterintuitively will be getting lower temperatures. And whenever you have that differential, the air will flow one way or the other. So patterns will change, I would imagine. Yes, sir.
What proportion of the time does the wind speed need to be at the minimum or above for generation before a site is worth looking into further?
Okay, good question. Again, you kind of reach back to what I call the capacity factor. As you take the maximum amount of energy that you could possibly derive from this unit, you pick the unit, and then you integrate your wind frequency chart with your power curve, and then you come up with how many kilowatt hours you're going to produce theoretically with that system. And then you divide the two, and if you're 20% or above, you probably have a pretty good a system that will be financially lucrative. Mike.
I love this idea of the community wind projects. I have a great spot for one, I think. I work for an outfit that's involved with the cleanup of the Clark Fork River, and we're removing the Milltown Dam. And with the dam coming out, there will be about 1.4 megawatts of power that will be lost, or it's already lost because it's been shut off. And so I've always thought some sort of offset renewable energy demonstration project that would generate the same amount, or once upon a time it generated almost 3 megs, I guess, that, made the Bonner School, say, zero energy or something, or powered a lot of low-income homes in the Bonner Milltown area.
Yeah.
And it would be pretty sexy because there's a lot of interest in Milltown already. And
yeah.
but where would you begin? I mean, what's the first step?
I've given you the first step. The first step is I guess to bring together, and we have it here, some critical mass of interested people. That's the second step. And yeah, you can't get away from the money aspect. But like I said, there's money coming down the pipe, and you can develop these concepts without having actually. Do you have an anemometer data? You don't, do you? Or do you? Maybe you do.
Well, yeah, they have anemometer data.
Okay.
Yeah, these are sites that were chosen because
they've been spec'd. Yeah.
Covers up and-
Okay.
What about Hellgate Canyon?
But I'm sorry.
Is there measurements from Hellgate Canyon?
Yeah, we have measurements in Hellgate Canyon. Yeah, there's a number of things you can do. You use the nearest measurement that you have, airport maybe, or Hellgate Canyon, or maybe somebody has their own personal weather station up in Bonner.
Well, University Mountain looked right down on it.
Yeah. The only thing, we're another few hundred feet above it, so wind patterns up there are different than down there. But Hellgate Canyon, acts as a funnel, and concentrates and focuses the wind as it goes through there. And of course, right there you have the Blackfoot coming in too. So it'd be a very interesting area to meter. And in fact, I've got 2 towers that need to be deployed. Maybe that's where I go with them, or one of them. Yes.
I always drive Highway 12 to see my folks in Roundup, and I'm intrigued by the use of wind power to fuel this Hooterite colony
Yeah.
outside of Martinsdale.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious about how they set their wind power generation up so that they work on the grid or in combination with the power company. It seems like that would be a really good model for a small burg such as Missoula.
Yeah. Well, that community in Martindale and TUDOT, I know the developer that put that together, and he's just a passionate guy about wind. In fact, if you ever drove down 90 past Livingston, you see 2-3 turbines there on the hillside. They're his turbines as well, and I understand they don't actually work, but they're neat lawn ornaments. What the model they used there is this guy was going around and probing the grid for underutilized substations and found a few out in that area. And so he knew that the power company had capacity to take generation there. And the other thing is, I was telling you about Altamont, which is a big wind farm in California. They have a number of these old wind farms, and they put them up with these old turbines that were rated around 50, 60, 70 kilowatts I'm talking about. Pretty small machines by today's standards. And so they're replacing these things slowly but surely. They're taking them out of service and putting up bigger, better units. And they're selling off these old ones for dimes on the dollar. So this guy got in and was buying up these machines as fast as they were dropping them. He's just buying them. And he got with the Hutterite colony, and they're a very industrious group, as you know, and I said, I want you guys to set up a machine shop. I'm going to bring these old things in. You guys go through and respec them. And they did. They went through and they cleaned them up and did whatever they needed to do and made new not new ones, but made serviceable machines. And so they put those things up. So he got a screaming deal on the equipment. He already did his homework on the grid, and he found places that can definitely take the power. And then he got a community wind project. He got people buying into the project, and it's I guess it was probably the first wind farm we had in Montana. And I don't know what the generation is. It's meg, something like that. There's not that many of them, and they're small machines. So, but yeah, it's a great little system.
But it's enough to fuel their refrigerators and.
Well, a lot of that, they do have, the community itself owns one tower. Maybe they have more now, but last I checked, they owned one tower. It was just theirs. And yeah, they were using that to power their, whatever they needed powered. The rest of the towers are considered a QF qualified facility. And so that power is going onto the grid. And is it Northwestern out there? I don't remember. Or MDU, I think it's Northwestern, is forced to buy that power. Yes?
I'm wondering if you can explain a little bit about the problem that electric grid has with resource like wind that is so, that fluctuates so much, and how they adapt to that, to their base loading and peak loading, and what do they have to do to accommodate wind power on the grid?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you think of the grid as a plumbing system, basically, that's a real nice analogy. So you have capacity issues, If you're putting on a generator, where are you putting it on your system? Are they